Your company would not have been able to navigate COVID-19 related closures without the power of internal communications keeping your employees safe and engaged. Armed with the advanced analytics available in Circle Broadcast, you can demonstrate the true value of your department in the C-suite. Learn more at circle.com/value.
I'm Sarah Jackson. Welcome to Internal Comms Pro, the podcast. I'm on the road this season to talk to the experts that can help internal communicators face their biggest challenges. The time has come to raise the internal knowing of the value that lies within. Well, here we are, our last stop on this road to realizing our value. Yes, today marks the last episode in this season. Now, don't worry, we're already planning for season 4 that will start in August. But I gotta admit, planning a finale for a season put some pressure on our team. I mean, are we just gonna Sopranos this and end with a black screen? I know I definitely did not want to get on a dragon and burn a city to the ground. So, who do we feature and where does this story end? The answer is you. We begin and we end with you. You know, Margaret Wheatley said, without reflection, we go blindly on our way. So it's time to pause now and reflect on all that's happened. We've been through a lot together this season, starting with a global pandemic. You know, it's not the first time our world has experienced this. By the mid-15th century, the Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, had struck Europe. In Wayne Bundy's book, Out of Chaos, he writes, "Psychological impact on the surviving population was surely immense. Now, as I reflect on the past few months, it occurred to me that throughout history, crisis, chaos birthed enlightenment, change, innovation. And when I'm trying to explain and make sense out of this chaos to my daughters, I tailor the message with more of a Laura Numeroff spin. You know, she was the one that wrote the series If You Give a Mouse a Cookie or a Moose a Muffin kind of thing. So the conversation with my daughters would go something like this. You see, girls, Renaissance creativity and enlightened thinking was brought forth by the access to literature. Well, why do people now have access? Well, books could be printed more widely. And how could books be printed more widely? The Gutenberg printing press was invented by Johann Gutenberg, a goldsmith from Germany. And by the way, his invention is widely considered to be one of humanity's defining inventions. Its defining moment, however, would never have been realized without the availability of a type of paper that could be fed through the press, which was rag paper. And the raw material to make loads of rag paper would have never happened if enormous piles of clothing hadn't accumulated practically everywhere in Europe. And numerous piles of clothing aren't accumulating if the Black Death hadn't wiped out half of the European population. My girls respond, "Can we now have a cookie or a muffin?" So let's grab a cookie and a muffin and start another story, a story that showcases how Alison Jackson, an internal communicator who went on her own journey and discovered how to use her whole self to go pro, providing value professionally and personally all along the way.
So I'm Alison Jackson, and I am a Communications Director at a Big Four consulting firm based in the Northeast.
What I love about you is just how you're presenting yourself out there on LinkedIn and to the world. And I think so many internal communicators have personal and professional passions. And I feel like you present that whole self so well. And so I'd love to dive in a little bit deeper about that today, if you're okay with that.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, it's been a work in progress and a struggle. It wasn't anything that happened overnight for sure. It's definitely been, over the past, I'd probably say 10 years. So as background, I've been in corporate communications for, gosh, I'm going to date myself, but about 20 years. But I've always been into health and fitness. I played field hockey in high school and college. I did jazzercise. I taught aerobics, back when it was called aerobics. I've always struggled with my weight. But I always loved the challenge of trying new things. So I've done marathons, triathlons, and I always used to read my dad's muscle and fitness magazines when I was in high school, and always thought it was so amazing how people could transform their bodies through diet and exercise. And that was always in the back of my mind, that that was one of those fitness goals I wanted to do. So fast forward, got married, had 2 kids, progressed through my corporate career, and it still was eating away at me that I really wanted to do this goal. So in 2012, I competed in my first bodybuilding competition, and I thought it was going to be a one and done goal. I was, really proud of myself that I finally did it after, shelving it for so long. But then I was like, I want to keep doing it. I just came back year after year, and I've been competing ever since. And I went pro. Had my pro debut last year. And at the same time, people were asking me, like, how are you doing this? What are you doing to get stage ready? So it kind of launched a little passion side hustle business. Totally unexpected, but love it to death. But going back to how do you bring your whole self and authenticity, for years, gosh, I think the first probably 5 or 6 years that I competed, I really kept it to myself. Like, I didn't want people I worked with to know, because it's, you're on stage in a bikini. That's not really professional.
Right. That's why I want to get into this, because I'm like, oh, this is a good story. So, okay, so keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah. Yeah, so I really kind of kept it, for lack of a better term, a secret, although I don't know how secret anything is when you're on Facebook. Um, but as it evolved more into a business, then I kept it even more of a secret, because I was like, oh, I don't want any of my jobs to think I'm not, showing up 100% every day to be a corporate communications professional. But I was so passionate about my hobby and now my business. More and more, I kind of, my coworkers slowly started asking me for help, and, what are you doing and how are you doing it? And then it got to the point where they were asking me to do lunch and learn presentations on how, about diet and exercise. And I was like, oh, maybe there is a correlation here. Being a communications professional, putting together presentations for leaders, I felt like, oh, this could be something. Like, maybe there's a whole new avenue here. So super super happy with how my employer has embraced it, promotes it, encourages it. And I don't think you get that at all companies. But bringing your whole self, your authenticity, who you are, and what you're passionate about, I feel like makes you so much more better at your job.
Absolutely. So it sounds like instead of this being a thought out, planned journey, that it feels like it was more of an organic, hey, I tried this, I liked it, I'm going to keep going a little bit more. Is that right?
Yes, yes. And it was, kind of dipping my toe in the water here and there. So, changing my LinkedIn profile, that I felt like was huge for me, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm basically putting out there in the world, like most people put what their job title is, and I was putting what my aspiration is. Like, I am a wellness advocate. I want to help, companies, individuals, people reach their fitness goals. And yeah, I'm a corporate communications professional. I feel like there is an intersection between your passions and your day job, regardless of what they are.
Well, and I love your LinkedIn profile picture because you have this shirt that says slay all day and it's fantastic and you look gorgeous and I just love it so much. If someone is in our audience and they have a certain personal passion, so they do internal comms, and of course, this time of quarantine, while I know it's a crisis, even for me personally, I feel like because I'm not commuting, I have something that I've never had before, and it is time back into my schedule to finally do all these things, to work out, to be healthy. So, in a way, I the good thing that's come out of quarantine is there has been time to think and to dream and to be really creative. And so I would imagine that some internal communicators, a personal passion might has now bubbled up or they might want to chase it down. So how would they get started, number one, to have the self-awareness about that? And number two, if they did want to go chase something down, what would be your advice to them to get started?
Sure. So I definitely agree with you that now is the time. There is so much time because we've eliminated so many different things in our schedules, that people could really kind of listen to that inner voice that maybe you were so busy and there was so much going on that you never really listened to. I know a lot of times people do what they think they should do that others expect of them instead of pursuing or embracing what they truly want to do. I'm a huge proponent of meditation. So if anybody has never tried it or feels like they don't know what they're doing, it's literally just quieting your mind and listening to what are those true wants and goals and aspirations that you have. And then it's just kind of building a backwards plan. So I'll throw an example, say you want to be a yoga teacher. So maybe it's, you know what, maybe now's the time I could see what are my online options. Almost everything now is online. So depending on what your goal is, it's kind of like backing into, okay, what's my ultimate goal, and then back stepping into it, and plotting that out, because I think it's going to be a long time before we go back to the quote unquote normal. And it's about looking at what was your normal and what do you want your new normal to be.
Yeah. Well, and I love you have a podcast also. So tell me a little bit about that, because I listened to, I think, your most recent episode about what gets measured gets managed. And I want to talk about that. But first, tell me about your podcast.
Yes, yes. So that was one of my 2020 goals, was to launch a podcast. It's called Fit to Lead. And it basically interviews high performing women who are prioritizing their self care so they could be at their best for their families, their careers, their business, whatever their goals are. And it's been awesome. I love just meeting the different women. And yeah, so I try to, once in a while insert some solo episodes. So what gets measured gets managed. I'm a huge proponent of, no matter what your goal is, if you're not measuring it and you don't have, key performance indicators or KPIs, then you're going to have a harder time reaching it.
Yeah. Well, and I listened to it. You sound great. I love the idea of the self-care and women. Why do we struggle with this? When you talk to so many of the women, are there some themes that you've unearthed that we can learn from? Like, why is this so difficult for us to take care of ourselves?
I think it goes back, and I know, just speaking as a mom, I know there's a lot of mom guilt, and I think that runs the gamut. Not even just moms, whether you have a pet or an older parent, or you just constantly feel guilty that you're not giving enough. And I firmly believe that if your cup isn't full, how are you going to fill somebody else's cup? So if you wear yourself down, you're not going to let the battery on your phone go down to 5 or 10%. So why would you let yourself get depleted like that? So I truly think that it's like a three-legged stool, like the mind, body, spirit. You need to really give time to yourself in all three of those areas to be at your best in any area of your life.
Yeah. Well, I know that I want to get to this, your most recent episode, the solo episode, what gets measured gets managed. Do you also, is that something that you pulled from your corporate communications psychology too?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of communicators struggle with, how do you measure? And if you don't have, the right platforms in place, tracking those metrics, and what are you aiming for? What's your objective? And seeing if you're making any movement or progress, whether it's, email communications or your weight or a marathon time, regardless of what it is, you definitely need to have the right measurement tools in place and know what your goals are.
And when you put those out there, for example, one of the reasons why I jumped on to ask you to be on the show is you had put out your 20 engagement speaking goal out there in the world, and I saw that. I'm like, I'll help you be one of them. I don't know if we count, um, but tell
Yes,
me
absolutely.
tell me about that. And is it hard even now to kind of put your goals out there and say, I'm trying to do this?
Yeah, it's, you are creating your own accountability, right? When I put the 20 and 2020 out there, and I try to say it for every speaking engagement, you're having other people hold you accountable. So I'll have people I didn't even realize were listening to me say, oh, how's that 20 and 2020 going? So you are creating a sense of accountability for yourself that you might not realize. But now that we moved online, I mean, it was I had a bunch of speaking engagements lined up, and a lot of them have been pushed out to like the fall. but I am getting a lot online, a lot more lunch and learns, a lot more webinars and online summits, podcasts. So yeah, no, it's definitely, I'm still working towards it, and this definitely counts.
So I want to ask you, since there is this sort of marriage that you figured out between this personal and professional brand. So if I'm an internal communicator, and part of our mission here at the Internal Comms Pro Collective is to really raise this industry collectively and the value of it and to have everyone know this. And so if I'm trying to, especially during this COVID-19 crisis, I feel like this has put a huge light on internal communicators and the need for them and their value. How can internal communicators now get above that and almost take credit, because it feels like they're so used to telling everybody else's story. Is there some tips or a method to where they can get a handle on their own brand so that they can elevate their value within their company?
Yeah, totally. And I totally agree with you that this crisis has shined a light like amazingly on internal communications. I feel like we're being brought to the table so much more than ever before. We're being looked at much more so as strategic advisors. A lot of leaders are like, we've never dealt with this before. We don't know like the best way to approach employees and communicate and what we should be telling them and how much or how little and how often, all those things. I think now it's like under a microscope that you can see exactly the importance, and that it's a huge part of companies building their brands, how you're communicating with your employees. And you see people doing it really, really well, and you see people doing it really, really poorly. And I think what's important is knowing as an internal communications professional what your expertise is, what you bring to the table, and then go full force with that. It might be leadership announcements or presentations or strategies or crisis communications. Like, I know everyone has their little niche and specialty and what they really, really are good at. So I would say go full force on that and really show people what you could do. Now more than ever, it's needed, definitely.
That's I didn't think of it that way, but you're right. Within the world of internal comms, depending on how you landed in internal comms, it feels like there is a little niche that each person has or that they're drawn to. So that is a great tip. So, what would you tell your younger, corporate comms self if you could go back? You said you've been doing this for 20 years. What would you tell that person now in terms not only a professional tip, or also what personal health tip would you tell your younger self?
Yeah. So I definitely would tell my younger self to, I think a lot of people are apprehensive of approaching leadership or approaching different people, that they think that they're, so much above them that they're either not going to have time or be dismissive. I would try to connect and network and talk to as many leaders and people in different areas, just to not only expose yourself in terms of networking, but just to really learn the business. I feel like I could have done that more so in my younger self, but I was so focused on the internal comms, the marketing, the different areas, that I really feel like I wish I would have gotten deeper into the business areas and connected with more people that way. And then health wise, I would say, and this is something I've done and I highly recommend, is building a health routine, a fitness routine into your schedule. That's a non-negotiable that you set aside time for. It's an important meeting with yourself. And you commit to that every day. That doesn't mean you have to work out every day, but maybe it means you just spend some time thinking by yourself during the day. But I find that if you do it first thing in the morning, you won't have an excuse to not do it later on.
Circle is a proud sponsor of the Internal Comms Pro podcast. As your company returns to the office and begins to form the new normal, employee communications are more important than ever. Circle Broadcast was built for internal communications and makes it easier to build a unified experience across email, intranet, and mobile. To find out how Circle Broadcast can help you build your organization's bright internal communications future, Visit circle.com/comms.
Yeah, I love that. Have a meeting with yourself every day. That is so good. So how do you think, we've been in this crisis now for several weeks. How do you feel internal comms professionals are feeling now? And you personally, are we through it? Are you kind of getting the hang of it? Are you still underwater? Give us what do you think the pulse of how folks are feeling at this point?
Sure, sure. So I know it varies. I know it varies for folks depending on obviously what organization you're with. I've always seen a ton of layoffs, but I've also seen a ton of communications jobs. And I think like we still have a lot of work to do, especially internal communications, because while we're still in the midst of it, and we're in the Northeast, so I kind of say we're in the belly of the beast. We still have to come out of it. So it's like, what's the new normal look like? What's it look like when we're going back out to our offices? I definitely think we still have a lot more work to do in terms of how companies now are going to operate in this new environment. So for good or for bad, I think we still have a lot of job security and work to do in internal comms.
Yeah. So is that where you are trying to find the new normal and then getting a plan to communicate that?
Yeah, yeah. So we are the way our team is organized is we all support different practices. So while we're all in different stages of it, we are all trying to figure out, okay, what is the best approach for when we're ready to go back? Like our clients going to want us on site? Are they going to still want us remote? And still helping employees to work remotely. What does that look like? How can we help them? And then also, it's important too, all those normal communication vehicles that we use, we have to be really cautious of because I think everyone is getting inundated with webcasts and virtual happy hours. And while you're trying to build engagement and communicate at the same time, people are just kind of getting tapped out.
Yeah, bombarded for sure. And are you finding new excitement and creativity within your own self because we're all thinking about our health and are you bringing that the state of kind of the time period of history where we are is that um how is that getting more of your creative energy flowing for your health coaching side of the business?
Yeah, so it's funny because health and fitness is a very saturated market, but it has been really, it's almost like a communications challenge. Like, okay, so how do I differentiate myself and how do I stand out? So I do feel like the pandemic has created this little kind of segment of people where it's like, yeah, people are churning out tips and workouts and stuff, but it's really building, again, going back to that routine, that meeting with yourself. How do you build this into your routine so that once we do go back to whatever normal is, that you keep it?
Yeah. And so how can if they are thinking about, a passion project or even in their, day job, how can they set themselves apart and differentiate themselves? Any tips on what to be thinking about to do that?
Yeah, so what I've been trying to do is look and see what is it that everyone else is, what are they not offering, I guess is the, like if you see a sea of, like I said, I see tips, I see articles, I see workouts, I see a lot of live workout. I'm like, but what's the missing piece? Like what's going to make people successful that you're not seeing out there? And it's hard to do.
So, what is the missing piece? What's gonna make people successful? Powerful questions from our friend Allison. As you reflect over the past months, what has been the missing pieces in your internal comms world? What's going to make you successful, your team successful, your employees and your company successful now moving forward? What are missing pieces within yourself? Our collective is broken into 3 sections: internal, comms, pro. And the internal part, we've spent time on this with Allison. Even earlier this season, we talked with Mark Mohammed Poor, another internal communicator. Remember him? Turned successful entrepreneur with starting his business Chasing the Sun. Remember what he said?
We're having to adjust an entirely different work style. We're having to show an increased sense of empathy. We're having to manage our families, people working remotely. We're going to have to build trust with our teams, and that takes time to acclimate. It takes time for our bodies and our minds to adjust.
Then we move to the heart of what we do, the comms part of Internal Comms Pro. the part where we love talking about honing our craft. Earlier this season, we dove deep into how to create relationships among departments with Mike O'Donnell from CBS Sports and Lenovo's Connor Walker. Evan from Red Banyan dove into the secret behind the strength of an internal communicator, and we even unearthed the most important question you could ever ask, along with the best place to start when revamping your company's employee onboarding experience.
It's amazing what happens to where you become the centerfold for a growth period of a relationship between two employees or two department heads. You can really create a lot of significance for yourself as an employee if you're seen as that bridge maker. That always comes back positively.
So again, I think it definitely called in new types of relationships with those teams that were much more urgent, much more frequent.
But I think the strength of the internal communications function derives in part by being able to bring together a diverse range of skill sets.
Like there are the question words: who, what, when, where, why, how. Literally, that is the best, most powerful question you can ever ask somebody.
Knowing your organizational values and ensuring that every single thing that you do drives those, reinforces those, represents those, is really ultimately the very best place to start, if that is at all possible.
Now, all of this internal work and external work of honing our craft, despite how terrifying and messing and heartbreaking, we now evolve into a whole new version of ourselves. It's what I like to call the pro. Yes, this is the pro part of Internal Comms Pro. Let's revisit what the pro side of the house looks, feels, and sounds like. I wonder if pros ever eat cookies or muffins.
Really don't underestimate the value you bring as an internal communicator to shape and change kind of the way that the organization works and actually drives its profitability.
I believe that internal communications people can be, if they choose to be, right, can be strategists, and they actually can influence the bottom line.
And I think leaders are getting wiser and wiser to the fact that internal comms is something that needs to be invested in, that needs to be resourced, that has to have budget, that has to have a strategy.
I want to stay in internal comms and do more of what I'm doing now. So I would definitely say it's not the stepchild anymore. Yeah. It's valued.
Yeah. And when we become pro, the true pro starts the renewing cycle all over again, always looking within. And we end with right where we started, with Allison.
But bringing your whole self, your authenticity, who you are, and what you're passionate about, I feel like makes you so much more better at your job.
Your whole self. That's what we've always been focused on this season. And what a journey. I know I've seen myself within you and your struggles, and hopefully you've seen yourself within the voices of our guest. The best part is that we grew closer to one another and are more connected, despite the fact that the entire theme for this year has been distance. I've never felt closer to my internal comms brethren and sisters. And if history repeats itself, as in the case of the bubonic plague, who knows the innovation, change, evolution, enlightenment, and new access to information this century's pandemic will birth. But without a doubt, we'll be here with you as we continue to engage one another and ultimately communicate and realize our value that lies within.
Internal Comms Pro Podcast is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our theme music is Hard Fought Victory by Purple Planet Music. Join us this summer, August 2020, and we'll be back with Season 4 of Internal Comms Pro, the podcast. Thank you for listening.